The invitation was innocuous at first glance. Simple white cardstock with embossed gold lettering, nestled between bills and junk mail on the counter. I wouldn't have thought much of it if it weren't for Emily's reaction when I picked it up. "Don't bother with that," Emily said, her voice sharp and dismissive as she breezed past me, wearing the black yoga pants that hugged her figure just right. She snatched the envelope from my hands and stuffed it into her purse with an almost frantic haste. "It's nothing important." I raised an eyebrow but let it slide for the moment. Something was off, though. Emily was the type to leave junk mail lying around for weeks. Yet here she was, scrambling to hide an invitation as if it were contraband. Later that evening, while she showered, I retrieved the envelope. "High school reunion," it read. "Class of 2005, Lakewood High." I hadn't heard her mention it once. Stranger still, it was just days away. "You go too. Tell me about this," I asked casually over dinner, sliding the invitation across the table toward her. Emily's fork froze halfway to her mouth, her expression tightening for a split second before she forced a laugh. "Oh, that? Yeah. I forgot to mention it. Just a little thing with some old friends. You wouldn't want to come. It's going to be boring." "Why not take me? I can meet your friends, hear some embarrassing stories about you from back in the day." Her laugh was high-pitched and fake, the kind she used when cornered. "It's more of a personal trip, you know, catching up with people I haven't seen in years. It's not really your thing." I didn't press further. Instead, I watched as she grew increasingly animated in the days leading up to the reunion. She went shopping for new clothes, got fresh highlights in her hair, and made a gym visit every morning. She hadn't put this much effort into anything in years, not even our anniversary. Suspicion gnawed at me, so I started paying attention. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. The messages were buried in her phone under a generic contact name. "Chris?" A string of texts told the story loud and clear. "Chris? Can't wait to see you. Just like old times. Emily, you always knew how to make me feel special. Chris, you still look as amazing as you did at prom." Scrolling further, I found a photo. Chris, her high school boyfriend, tall, square-jawed, with a smirk that probably worked wonders in the hallways of Lakewood High. The same smirk that now set my blood boiling. I'd heard about Chris once or twice over the years. According to Emily, he was ancient history, a brief fling, long forgotten. The texts told a different story. They planned to attend the reunion together, and from the looks of it, she'd been primping herself to reignite whatever they had. But the kicker was her last message. "Just don't say anything about my husband. It'll ruin everything." What exactly was she planning to ruin? What exactly was she planning to ruin? I stared at the screen, adrenaline coursing through me, then placed the phone back exactly where I found it. Let her think I was none the wiser. If she wanted to sneak around, I'd make sure to meet her at her own game. The reunion wasn't going to be just another dull evening of small talk and cheap wine. Not for her, not for me. Emily's lies weren't just casual deceptions. They were performances, polished and precise. She seemed to think I was oblivious, wrapped up in my own world. But she didn't understand the kind of man I'd become over the years. My time in the army had taught me one thing above all: how to observe, plan, and execute without tipping my hand, while Emily was in the bathroom, humming some pulp brew tune and applying her overpriced makeup. I sat on the edge of our bed, scrolling through her social media accounts. A wealth of information lay there, ripe for the taking. Pictures from her high school years, tagged friends, nostalgic posts about her old clique. With every click, her life from nearly 2 decades ago unfolded before me like a roadmap. Her high school reunion wasn't some random gathering. It was a curated event. I found the details on a public page. Location, date, even a PDF of the attendee list. Names jumped out at me. Chris Anderson, the smug prick she was meeting, and a dozen other faces I didn't care about. What mattered most was that Emily's classmates wouldn't all remember one another clearly. Time had faded memories, making my plan feasible. I spent the next 3 hours constructing a cover. My name would be Paul Banning, class of I6, a former student who transferred to a neighboring school. I pieced together the persona from Emily's Facebook history and profiles of alumni I could imitate. A few vague anecdotes, a fake ID I'd fabricated in my youth for less noble purposes, and a custom printed name tag ordered overnight. sealed the disguise. The hardest part was waiting. The reunion was held in the Lakewood Country Club, a gaudy monstrosity on the edge of town. I arrived early, blending in easily with the slow trickle of guests milling about in the banquet hall. The organizers had gone overboard, polished wood floors, dim mood lighting, and a nostalgic playlist of early 2000s hits playing softly in the background. It was the perfect setting for my wife's deception to unravel. I wore a simple but sharp navy suit, kept my hair slightly disheveled to match the persona of a carefree alumnus, and slipped my fake name tag over the lapel. Around me, people were exchanging awkward hugs, squinting at name tags, and struggling to match faces to faded memories. Emily walked in 40 minutes after me, arm in arm with Chris Anderson. She had chosen a dress I'd never seen before, tight crimson, plunging in the front. She looked stunning, and I hated her for it. They didn't see me, not yet. I stayed in the corner, nursing a whiskey, letting her movements etch themselves into my mind. She greeted everyone with exaggerated charm. Her voice a little too loud, her laughter a little too forced. I could see the glances she threw at Chris, filled with that teenage eagerness she once reserved for me. And then came the lies. "Oh, I married the perfect man," she gushed to a pair of old friends, flashing her wedding ring. "We have such a wonderful life together. But just so busy with work, couldn't make it tonight." She left out the part where she begged me to stay home and then made arrangements with her high school flame. I moved closer, mingling just enough to overhear snips of their conversations. Chris was every bit the cocky bastard ass I'd expected. He dominated every group he joined, his laughter booming over the room. Emily hung on his every word, touching his arm when she thought no one was looking. But I was looking. As the night wore on, I made my move, approached a table of women who looked to be in their early 40s, all tipsy and nostalgic. "Paul Banning," I said, extending a hand. "Transferred to Jefferson High senior year, but I was in a few classes with some of you before that. Ring any bells?" "Oh, of course," one of them exclaimed, clearly too drunk to care whether she recognized me or not. "You were in Mrs. Abby's class, right?" "Exactly." I lied, smiling. "It's good to see some familiar faces again." I lingered long enough to cement my cover, then began circling the room. When I passed Emily, I nodded casually, as if I were just another old acquaintance. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't stop me. She was too focused on Chris. By the time dinner was served, I had slipped into the role of Paul so seamlessly that no one questioned me. I learned that Chris was giving the closing speech, a fact that Emily seemed disproportionately thrilled about. She whispered in his ear constantly, giggling like a schoolgirl while he rested a hand on her lower back. What neither of them noticed was the woman watching from across the room, a petite blonde watching from across the room, who looked far less cheerful. I hadn't recognized her at first, but when I saw her name tag, everything clicked. Laura Anderson, Chris's wife. When Laura stepped out for a breath of fresh air, I followed. She stood on the club's veranda, arms crossed, staring into the darkness. "Evening," I said, keeping my tone light. She looked up, startled but polite. Hi, enjoying the reunion. It's been interesting," she replied, leaning casually against the railing. "You seem like you're not having the best time." She sighed. "Reunions aren't really my thing, but Chris insisted I come." "Yeah, he seems persuasive," I said, letting the implication hang in the air. Her eyes narrowed slightly. What's that supposed to mean?" I glanced back toward the banquet hall where Emily and Chris were locked in an all too intimate conversation. "I think we might have something in common." "Laura, you ever wonder if your husband's up to something?" Her face paled, but she didn't look away. "What are you saying?" I took out my phone, pulling up a picture ID taken earlier. Emily's hand lingering too long on Chris' thigh. I handed it to her without a word. Laura's expression darkened as she studied the image. "Bastard," she muttered. "Thought you should know," I said, slipping the phone back into my pocket. "But I've got a plan to deal with them." "Interested?" She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. "What do you need me to do?" The pieces were falling into place. The mood inside the banquet hall had shifted. The crowd was buzzed from the open bar, and conversations grew louder, punctuated by bursts of laughter. The class of 2005 was fully immersed in its reunion, nostalgia, oblivious to the storm brewing in the corner. Laura and I stood by the bar, quietly conspiring while Emily and Chris continued their charade. Laura's anger simmered beneath her composed exterior. She gripped her champagne-flute glass tightly, her knuckles white. "So, what exactly is your plan?" she asked, her voice low. "Expose them," I said, leaning closer. "During Chris's big speech, I've been gathering evidence all night, photos, recordings. We'll confront them in front of everyone." Her lips curled into a thin smile. "You're not pulling any punches, are you? They've earned this?" She took a sip of her drink, glancing at the center of the room where Emily and Chris were huddled together. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to play along for a bit longer. Pretend nothing's wrong. Stick close to Chris. Act like the devoted wife when he goes up to give his speech. That's when we strike." Laura nodded, her resolve hardening. "Let's do it." The event program was winding down. Emily had been clinging to Chris like a barnacle, laughing at his jokes and batting her eyelashes as though they were the only two people in the room. I watched from a distance, my anger simmering but controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced one of the organizers from the stage, "it's time for our keynote speaker. Please welcome one of our most successful alumni, Chris Anderson." The crowd erupted into applause as Chris strode confidently to the podium, flashing his trademark grin. Emily beamed from the front row, her hands clasped together like a proud cheerleader. Laura stood off to the side, her expression unreadable. Though her grip on her purse tightened, Chris launched into his speech, a nauseating mix of self-congratulation and nostalgic anecdotes. He talked about his high school achievements, his rise in the business world, and the importance of never forgetting where you came from. I caught Laura's eye and gave her a slight nod. It was time. Just as Chris was wrapping up with some sappy platitude about staying true to yourself, I stepped forward. "Hold on a second," I said, loudly, cutting through the applause. All eyes turned to me. Chris faltered, his smile freezing. "Yeah. Can I help you?" "You already have," I said, my voice calm but carrying a dangerous edge. "I think it's time." Everyone here knew the truth about you and Emily. The room fell silent. Emily's face went pale, her smile collapsing into a look of panic. "The hell are you doing?" she hissed, rising from her seat. I ignored her, stepping closer to the stage. "Chris, why don't you tell everyone about the little reunion you've been having with my wife behind closed doors? Or should I?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. "You're out of line," Chris said, his voice tight. "This is a private event." "You're right, it is private," I interrupted. "Just like the messages you've been sending my wife." I pulled out my phone and a mic, held it up, scrolling through screenshots of their tech. "Can't wait to see you. Just like old times." I read aloud. "Oh, and my personal favorite, Don, tell your husband." Emily lunged for me, but I sidestepped easily. "You've lost step. You're mine," she shrieked. "This is ridiculous." Laura chose that moment to step forward, her voice cutting through Emily's protests. "Actually, it's not ridiculous at all. It's pathetic," she said, turning to the crowd. "While my husband was busy pretending to be the perfect alumnus, he was also busy sneaking around with this man's wife. I'm done pretending. Here's the proof." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small stack of printed photos. Emily and Chris got in compromising positions throughout the evening. She handed them to the organizer, who stared in shock before passing them to others nearby. The whispers turned into murmurs, then full-blown chaos as the photos circulated. "You bitch!" Emily screamed at Laura, lunging toward her. But I stepped between them, my voice low and menacing. "Try it. I dare you." Emily froze, her bravado crumbling as she realized she was cornered. Chris, meanwhile, tried to salvage his dignity. "This is a misunderstanding," he stammered. "Emily and I are just old friends." "Save it," Laura snapped. "We're done." She pulled off her wedding ring and threw it at his feet. I turned to Emily, my voice dripping with venom. You had it all planned out, didn't you? A perfect little reunion with your high school sweetheart. Too bad you didn't count on me showing up." Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The silence stretched for a moment before I addressed the room. "For those of you who still think this is some kind of mistake, don't worry. I'll be sending the full recording of tonight's events to anyone who's interested." I held up my phone, the red recording light blinking. "Now, If you'll excuse me, I said, turning to Emily one last time. I have a lawyer to call. You'll be hearing from him soon. With that, I walked out, leaving the room in stunned silence. Rora followed a moment later, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The night wasn't over yet, but Emily and Chris' charade was.